All right, what is up, everyone? Welcome to a very special 420 edition of the How to Retire from NASCAR DFS live preview show. I am your host, Jason Hamlet, and today we are barreling down to one of the most exciting and eerie tracks on the circuit, the Talladega Superspeedway. That's right, legend tells of an ancient curse laid by spirits of warriors who once roamed the hallowed grounds of Talladega. But fear not, fellow DFS addicts, for I have summoned reinforcements guiding us on this journey, armed with sage wisdoms and a DraftKings talisman, is our very own NASCAR DFS medicine man, Ryan Larkin from Daily Fan Racing.
What was that? Is this the Lord of the Rings or something? What in the that was
What, you don't know the story? Come on, man.
I know
right?
the Indian burial ground, which I don't think they're allowed to say anymore or something.
What?
But I haven't heard it in years. I feel like Larry Mack's been told not to say it, but
I was wondering why we stopped hearing that story. I was wondering, is it they told him to stop?
It's either they told him to stop or something, or honestly, maybe it was found out not to be true because there hasn't been a lot of carnage here with the Cup Series in recent years. So maybe it just stopped being true in general.
No, we still see some cars flipping, right? I mean, it's still Talladega. We still see some carnage and chaos and just random shit happening, right?
Not a ton with the next gen car, at least. It's been a lot tamer than I would like. I prefer more if we're gonna have a shit show style race, I'd rather it be a shit show than kind of what we've seen in the last couple of years. But we'll see. It's a new day, right? We saw the Xfinity Series deliver in that nonsense way that they tend to do. So maybe the Cup Series will deliver as well.
Yeah, that is right. See, I mean, the Xfinity Series delivered chaos. I mean, anytime you get these cars packed up, stacked up, all it takes is one guy to wiggle, right? And of course, when you got the curse, I mean, there was like I heard three different stories at one time about the curse, right? Wasn't it like the two tribes were warring, one tribe like had a coalition with like Andrew Jackson or something, they got pushed off, and then they like cursed the medicine man cursed the land, right? That's obviously the famous story of the Indian burial ground. But then my favorite obviously is the race, like the horse race that happened on it. Chief got knocked off and like died from the race and like cursed the ground, right? That's the best one, right?
Daily Fan History Channel. I don't know these. Like I just knew the generic Indian burial ground. I had no clue about all this. That's
man,
making me want to research it, honestly.
You should. Yeah, you should. All right. Well, we said we're going to try to make this a quick one today, right? It's Talladega. Yes. It's super speedway racing. You mentioned chaos, right? So, like you said, there's not as much chaos. So, where would you rank Talladega in like chaos factor between the super speedways?
If we assume Atlanta is one of three, then Talladega, is last. I feel like at this point, at least in the past couple of years, 3-4 years, it just really hasn't been this huge carnage-filled event. When you look at the last 5 races, we've had 4 or fewer natural cautions and 4 of those 5 races. Like we haven't seen this high caution rate. Not a lot of caution laps. It's been a lot of green flag racing. Last year had 2 natural cautions and only about 6 DNFs. So it's not like Daytona where we see this 20 DNF race where just the guys in the very back are finding their way to a top 15 finish through attrition. That hasn't necessarily been the case here in recent years, which can make it more of a challenge to predict. It doesn't mean it's impossible. It doesn't mean we can't see 10, 15 DNFs. But like the fall race in 2022 had 4 DNFs. That's such a hard thing to predict because everyone has the ability to finish top 5, right? Like most of these drivers have the speed in their cars to figure it out. And then you look back on a race like that where it's like it's a guessing game, like you're shooting fish in a barrel type deal. So I'm a little nervous about breaking this one down, especially because I think there's a ton of great plays. And I think it's a really good slate for wanting to play guys with high place differential potential. But it's also a situation where do they crash out? Do we get a higher carnage race where these guys start crashing out and the chalk dies? Or do we get a regular clean race where Hamlin and Blaney and obvious plays are just at the front delivering like they typically do? And when you see the results of Blaney and Hamlin here and they're delivering top 5 finishes at like a 70% clip, that's a good indicator that Talladega is just not as crazy and carnage filled as some of its sister tracks.
I mean, I hear you say that, right? Like I'm hearing you saying that, but like how many like close calls? Like there's so many close calls in those races. Like there's so many guys that probably should have wrecked. They caught it. That would have been a 20 car wreck. How many times did they wreck coming across the line and take out 20 cars? Like that could have happened on lap 2. Right. I still think just because be careful thinking like just because we haven't seen it at Talladega, this could be the week we see 25 cars. Like there's no reason it can't, like, unless we just don't ever see them getting 3 wide. But if we see 3 wide racing, that opportunity is going to be there for half the field to be taken out.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. It's definitely always on the table. It's just harder to build for that. It's harder to be like, I'm going to punt with Cody Ware and BJ McLeod. Or those are the only 2 real back markers we have anymore. I'm going to punt with these safer plays, hoping they just ride around, because we aren't guaranteed this high DNF rate. So it's a lot more of a 50-50 stance. Like there are a lot of ways you can build for this race, which makes it more challenging, but that's also more fun, right? Like you don't have to just be like, I'm going to stack the back and move on. That doesn't necessarily apply here, which is kind of cool.
Okay, well, let's get into it. Let's start talking strategy. Disclaimer, obviously, guys, you want to ask some questions, please throw them in there. We'll try to get to them and ask Larkin and get his thoughts on those questions you want to have asked. Don't forget to hit that like button, smash it for us, please. Hit that heart, hit that subscribe, so that way you will be notified when we put out these shows. Like I said, we have a part-time schedule this year, only doing half the races, so if you subscribe, you will never miss an episode. All right, so you've kind of already answered this question, right? But to stack the back or not to stack the back. So you're saying you're not fully leaning into the stack the back strategy this race.
Well, the one side note to that is the fact that a lot of guys starting the back are obviously huge upside guys in elite cars, guys with top 5 potential. So I am going to play a lot of guys in the back. I'm definitely going to target those drivers who have the upside that the place differential gives them. A guy starting towards the front in top 10 doesn't have a huge upside. It's not super likely that anyone in the top 10 is going to be optimal. If it is, it's going to be one guy. There's not a lot of top 10 starters that are optimal here. And so, yes, I'm not as strongly on the just playing the guys 30th on back. I'm definitely a lot more interested in guys like Hamlin, Blaney, Keselowski in the 20s. I definitely like, pivots off of those like Jones and Barry and Suarez, who are in the 20, mid 20s that can be lower owned plays. And then even guys in the teens that start maybe 18th that can finish top 5, add a little bit of place differential, get a high finish, and be at a lower ownership than the guy starting at the back. And because we have guys like Blaney and Hamlin hit at such a high rate here, I'm not as fearful of them crashing out in theory. And then I'm also not like, hey, I have to play these guys in the back because their floors are 40 points and their upsides are 60. Because I don't like Ross Chastain might just run 20th in this race. He might just finish 20th in a normal clean race if that's how it plays out. So it's not like a guarantee that those plays are going to hit either. Whereas Daytona, I go into it thinking, dude, if they just avoid the carnage, they're going to score 45, 50 points, right? That doesn't necessarily play into my thinking this week. So, yes, I love the upside of the guys in the back. And yes, I will be heavier on those plays. But I'm not going to be like, holy crap, Larson starts last, I have to slam him in. I'm not as comfortable with that as I would be at Daytona or other tracks. Or Atlanta. Yeah, I guess not that many other tracks.
I feel like that's been like the way a lot of like the DFS guys have been over the last couple of years is that nobody wants to say stack the back, right? Because there's more to it than just saying stack the back. But I mean, the reality of it, like Larkin, right? The majority of your lineups are going to consist of those guys starting 20th on back, right? Like you're still going to be stacking the back. We're all going to stack the back. You're not stacking the very back, but still like. I'm going to argue. I still think there is, value in playing. That's you could probably play a line with those last 6 because if that carnage happens, right? Because these races are unpredictable, right? Like, I mean, we're not going to get. I don't think we need to get into the whole stats on optimal lineups in the past, like as in this and that, because it's so freaking random. Like, I hate talking about that when you come to super speedways because it's like these guys are going into a shaker. You're throwing them out, then go have a way. Like last year's optimal lineup is definitely not going to predict this year's optimal lineup, right?
Right. Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. Like stack the back works because realistically, if you get a high carnage race and their upsides are good and their floor, like they have a good shot at it. But even if they don't, even if it's a clean race, you would assume those guys are kind of moving up 10, 15 spots. So they're going to score well kind of in either situation. So yeah, all those guys are really good plays. I think sometimes I get in the mindset of like, how can this play be optimal? What's their path? And so I maybe lean more towards, guys starting a little bit further up sometimes, or like, hey, don't rule this out. But like my top 11 projected drivers start basically 21st on back. And that includes, of course, Blaney, Hamlin, and Keselowski, who start 21, 22, and 23. But everyone else is basically like 25th on back. A lot of guys in the 30s. Yes, all my higher projected drivers are going to be guys starting in the back. All the guys that have the most upside are in the back. So you're going to hammer those guys into your lineups. I just feel like when I'm trying to talk someone into winning a gigantic contest or help them out or whatever, I don't want to rule out a guy starting 17th or Bubba Wallace, starting 14th, where I'm like, I can see Bubba Wallace finishing top 3 and being optimal or something like that. So from that perspective, that's why they don't stack the back necessarily.
Yeah, we definitely see those guys, those plays get optimal, right? But I think when you when you get into that frame of thought, you're set yourself up for getting in this lottery style playing, like, oh, this guy could be it, this guy could get there, this guy, because like obviously anybody can get there in this unpredictable race. But why I think I still want to lean into that stack the back is because the one thing you can predict, right, in these races, at some point at Talladega, there's going to be a big one, right? Like whether it's this race, whether it's in the fall, whether it, 1 in 4 maybe, like there's going to be big ones at Talladega. So if you always lean into that, like, at least 1 out of 4 races, what's going to win that race is going to be stacked. Like that's the only thing you can predict is when that wreck happens and what's the type of plays that are going to win. So that's why I think leaning into it, it may not work this week, but when that wreck happens, if you just keep leaning into it, like you're going to have those BJ McLeods at 5% and just freaking crush, dude. Like Cruz, I think it's, I'm not going to say Cruz, but he's been like doing that same strategy. And he just leans into it and it just works, right? Eventually it's going to work. It's the only thing.
There's definitely a percentage aspect to it where if you play, and I'll use a different analogy. When I was doing World Cup tournaments and pools and stuff with people, we would pick the winning score of every game. And the rule of thumb is that you should just pick 2-1 for every game because that's the most likely score in soccer, right? And over the course of 65, 70 games, whatever it is, you're going to hit a certain amount of times. Whereas if you start hunting and pecking and trying to guess the score, you're less likely to land on it. And so that mindset of I'm going to stack the back and it will eventually come true is 100% true. It's a lot more true in Xfinity than at the Cup level. But yes, you're 100% right on that. And so to an extent, I do like that. And even last year, like it was a low carnage race. There wasn't a lot of DNFs, but when you look at the guys at the front, Corey LaJoy started 36th, finished 4th. Justin Haley started 30th, finished 6th. Chandler
it's
Smith.
The Cup Series. These guys can still pay off, right? It's the Cup Series. Those guys can still pay off. Like you mentioned, you mentioned McLeod, but even McLeod can run like low 20s in a no carnage race at Talladega if he just gets on the right strategy, hooked up with the right guys. Like we've seen it. Like it's not that crazy. Story's not going to take you down, but it's not going to freaking destroy your lineup either, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like McLeod was 29th in the last race here. We did have kind of like an 8-car wreck with 20 to go or whatever, and he got up to 29th. That was probably like the worst case scenario for him when there's a big wreck like that, and the fact that there wasn't another one on the restart right after that or anything. Like we got to the end of the race pretty clean after that one big wreck. In a lot of instances, we have another big one, right? Like there's one and then another, and then it kind of chain reacts to the point where all of a sudden BJ McLeod is 17th, or your entire top 10. I sent the screenshot. I don't know when it was, but it was like Honeyman, Ellis, freaking Emmerling, Deegan's. Like this is the shittiest top 10 I've ever seen in my life. And that happens when you start, seeing these multiple wrecks back to back because these guys can't get their shit together on restarts. But again, I give the Cup guys a little bit more respect, and also the fact that there's just more downforce and more grip with this Cup car. I think that like they're able to control the cars better in general, and everything. But I mean, we're definitely going to hammer those guys, and I know we should probably get into some specifics in terms of plays, but I don't necessarily disagree with that. I definitely think if you want to go with that mindset of I'm going to do this every single time, and eventually it's going to come true, then this is definitely a smart strategy, percentages wise.
All right. Well, yeah, let's start diving into those plays. Let's start talking about the guys. So I think the one thing we're definitely going to have to figure out how we're going to navigate this slate is like what we're going to do about the chalk, right? Because we've been talking, prefacing this first 15 minutes of the show, talking about the randomness and how crazy it can be. Even guys who you think could be good, even with no carnage, might just ride 20th, get stuck, get offsetting pit strategies, right, and all that kinds of stuff. So how are you approaching these chalk guys? To me, there's 5 guys that just jump out right away to chalk. Tell me if I'm missing anybody. Kyle Larson, Ross Chastain, Ricky Stenhouse, Noah Gragson, and Corey LaJoie. I would call them.
Yes, I mean those are definitely 5 of my 8 highest projected drivers. So yes, I agree with that. I think you're playing into that guy starting in the back thing. I think we're going to see Hamlin, Keselowski, and Blaney come in at similar ownership, especially to like Gragson, some of those guys. I don't
you can
think
play all those guys and one of those guys though. So
yeah,
right,
but
isn't that what most people would do?
I think there's 8 or 9 drivers in the pool instead of having 3 or 4 that are just ultra chalky. Like in the Xfinity race, we had Anderson, we had Burton, and even to an extent we had Earnhardt, right? And those were the 3. Mm-hmm. We have like 8 or 9 in this race, so I think the ownership is going to be more spread out. I don't know if anyone's going to necessarily be massively owned. I think they'll all be kind of in the same 25 to 35, maybe 40 for like Larson because he's dead last or something like that. But I think they're all going to be pretty equal. And I think that's a good thing. Like it's going to kind of spread things out. You're not going to have to battle a 50% owned driver. But those are the 8 obvious plays. Now, if they wreck out like Justin Allgaier and Brandon Jones in the chalked in the Xfinity Series race, then Anderson as well, and Earnhardt had the engine failure. When the chalk busts like that, then you run into the situation where other things can start coming into play. So I think all those guys see a lot of ownership. They all have top 10 potential, right? They all have massive upsides because of where they start and what their race finishing and even race winning potential with some of them is that they're all amazing plays. But you also got to factor in that they're going to be 25, 30, maybe even more in terms of ownership. That's going to see a lot of the field on them. And then if they do crash out in a highly volatile type track, that maybe you're going down a bad road by being too heavy on them.
All right, so of those 8 guys, right? We won't get into the specifics of like how they rank. Like we know probably Larson, Chastain is going to be probably the 2 of the highest guys on the slate, right? And then Stenhouse, Gragson, LaJoie, Blaney, Hamlin, Kez are going to be 6 of the next 8. Those would be the 8 highest owned guys on the slate. So when you're building for today, let's say you're building 20 max, right? Are you putting a rule in for how many of those guys you're going to play in a lineup?
Yeah, I would probably put a percentage number on it. I'd probably cap everyone in that range to like a 40% number. I don't mind if it gives me a little bit more. Like if you have a stance where you just want more Chastain or whatever, and you're higher on that, that's fine. But I think there's enough drivers in that range that it's like Burton hit today, and it was like there wasn't a lot of competition for him. If he finished in the top 10, he's going to be like the highest scoring guy. And so his ownership number needed to be super high. Whereas this one, like I feel like I can beat a really good scoring Larson with Hamlin, with Blaney, with other guys. Like I don't feel like I have to be super heavy on one driver. So I do want to kind of lower that overall ownership number and spread it out more around the group. And that's just because there's more viable options. So and that's not even counting like your secondary options, your pivots, your other things. Like just from the chalk group of 8 or so drivers, I don't want to be too high on anyone in particular because all of them have pretty much the same upside and potential. They're all going to project within a handful of points of each other, right? They're all very, very similar in terms of their potential. So I'm not going to be super high on anyone over the other unless I just like want to go into the race tomorrow and be like, I want to root for Ross Chastain. I'm going to go 70%. I don't know why you would, but you could. Like people throw down.
Sounds like something I would do.
Yeah, well, and it's kind of the same thing. Like if you're throwing a $25 bet on Ross Chastain to win, then throw. Like I don't know. Like maybe that's just what you want to do, and you want to root for Ross. But Yeah, I
But
would definitely kind of limit it to that 40-ish% number.
what's the max number of these guys you would put in a lineup? Like, would
Oh,
you
from
put
this range, I'd put
for
6
this
of
from
6 from this range.
you would load up with all 6 of these guys in a GPP?
I wouldn't be afraid to do that. Absolutely not, because they all have 60-point
Wouldn't it
upside.
be like, but I mean, aren't you just like, but they're all just so massively owned. You would just
I don't
go with
care.
you would you're going with the field in like in a high variance race that can be somewhat unpredictable.
For two reasons. One, now if you're playing in the large contest and you're going up against 50,000 lineups or whatever it is, yeah, it's probably smart to be a little bit different. But one, I like cashing. I like making profit. So I'm not afraid to just kind of lean into that. I'm not afraid to just be like, I'm looking to get out of here with a double up or a triple up. You 3x the Xfinity race, right? Like that felt good. I'm not afraid to do that. And I feel like these guys gave me the best shot to do it. And then they're also the guys with the best upsides. Like aside from a fluke performance from like Barry or someone like that, these are the best plays. These are the obvious best plays. And unless Joey Logano goes out there and leads 80 laps and wins, there's not many people that can outscore this group. So yeah, I don't mind going really heavy on them. I think you can go less if you want, just for ownership's sake. But I've never been a big like I have to be different for ownership. I play the best plays. I'm trying to get the best 6 plays in my lineup. So it's not something I'm going to be super stressed about trying to play ownership. And honestly, I don't think ownership is going to be massive on any one guy. I think it's like, okay, that guy's 25, that guy's 25, that's 25. And if, 20 other people have it and we split it, cool. I still had the winning lineup. And if not, then I cash the lineup and make money with it. Like to me, these races are more about turning a profit. And if I have a shot at the optimal, great. If I don't, whatever. It's never been something where I'm like, I got to start playing with ownership leverage because like Kyle Larson last week was super chalk. And I was like, hey, he busted in this situation a lot. Maybe we should look elsewhere. I don't feel that same way about this race.
Then do you lean pretty heavy into cash games in here at Talladega? Because I know I typically do on super speedways. I'll lean pretty heavy into cash games because they used to be pretty easy to beat, but I don't really like them anymore.
I do. I get a little bit nervous sometimes, and a lot of it's because of the recent Talladega races where we haven't seen the cards. Like I've played stack to back. I've played freaking Austin Therio and JJ Ellie, and then we don't get the crashes, or those drivers crash out themselves, and it just hasn't worked out a couple times. But it's got me kind of skittish here at Talladega. But yeah, I mean, you definitely could play a lot of cash here. My cash lineup crushed today. Like you look at the lineup, you're like, yeah, that cashed easily. It was no problem. The only thing I'll say is I feel like you can cash just as easily in tournaments here at Talladega. You know, when you look at a cash lineup, those drivers that we've been talking about are going to be 60% owned, right? Their ownership numbers are going to go a lot higher. So you're dealing with a lot of people with the same builds. You're going to be in a very tight pack, and it may be 5 or 8 points that separate you from cashing and not cashing because everyone's going to be on the same guys. Whereas in tournaments, those ownership numbers are much, much lower because people are spreading out ownership. They're giving Bubba Wallace love. They're giving, William Byron love. They're giving whoever else ownership, and that drags ownership of all these other plays. So when there is a crash involving 8 guys in the front and all these guys move forward and they all score 35, 40 points and you have a nice, well-rounded score, it cashes in tournaments. And it might actually be easier to cash in a tournament than it is to cash in cash games, if that makes sense. Yes, I do like cash. It's been really good to me, but I've kind of found that if it's going to cash in a cash game, it's going to cash in a tournament too. And I'd like the chance of potentially winning bigger money than just doubling up. So it just kind of depends. Kind of how you feel. I'm looking at the Xfinity slate right now to see what it looked like. And the cash line, cash line was a little bit less in cash games by like 6 points. Like it was pretty equal there. So I feel like the same thing kind of applies to Cup, and I think you might have a chance to min cash lineups. And yeah, it might just be min cash, but then you also have the opportunity if it's a great lineup to win big. So I kind of like chasing those just as much.
All right. Well, we've beat the chalk. Obviously, chalk are good plays for a reason, right? We've talked about them. So let's talk about some pivots. So, is there anybody above that 9K range that you like as a pivot? Outside of off those chalk guys.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple. I need to pull up my sheet here. I'm sorry. I did a bad
It's
job.
okay. We got Byron, Chase, Byron
All right,
13th.
yeah. So really, my two favorite, or the only two I'd really work with, are Byron and Wallace. Elliott maybe to an extent, Logano maybe to an extent. If you're under the impression that they can lead a chunk of laps, that's certainly possible. I don't mind the plays, but we don't see a lot of guys starting top 10 be optimal here. It's definitely a narrow path for them. They have to lead laps and they have to finish top 3 or potentially win. So it's a very difficult thing for them to be optimal. William Byron and Bubba Wallace at least offer 10 plus place average points, which is a boost. And so if they are up there and they can lead or win, then they can score well. Those are like the GPP pivot. Like, there's such an obvious group of Blaney, Hamlin, Keselowski, and Larson up there, and then even Chastain at 8,700. That really Byron and Wallace should be really low owned. And so if you're trying to be different, if you're trying to play off of the ownership side, then those would be the two. But it's not. It's tough to get off that main group because of how good of plays they are, and to get on Wallace and Byron is going to be difficult mentally for anybody that's trying to do it. But sometimes that's what it takes, right? Sometimes it takes getting 9%. I think last year, we had a Daytona takedown, and it was like 8% Chris Buescher and 12% Brad Keselowski starting like 9th and 11th, right? That's the type of thing that hits sometimes. So you can't rule those guys out either.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I love Byron, and I'll go as far as saying I love Chase Elliott. Both those guys there as potential pivots. I mean, I am going to much rather play those guys than the higher owned Blaney, Hamlin, and Keselowski. I mean, because both those guys, they have 5 wins between them, right, on super speedways in the next gen era. I mean, HMS has been bad fast, all year. There's no reason to think that they're not going to be fast, especially Byron, right? I mean, guys have been lights out on them on these, won at Daytona, obviously 3rd here at Talladega last year, 7th at this race last year. So, and you're going to get those guys at like 9% ownership. Like you said, no one's going to play them, and they have race winning upside. I think if you're looking for to be different, those guys who have race winning upside and who you think are going to get to the front and stay out of trouble, right? I think that's your best opportunity to get different and to find that leverage.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's go. Who else do you like here as pivots? Let's go now, starting below 9K. I guess anybody else here.
Yeah, so there's a pretty good group that I don't really like, and it's guys starting top 10. Like, it's hard to be like, I don't like Chris Buescher because he won Daytona last year, and I do think him and Keselowski have the ability to get hooked up and potentially win this race again, or win any super speedway race. But I don't really like him. I don't like Bell. I don't like Truex. I don't see them as big threats here. Cindric and Dillon don't feel like guys that I can trust to go out there and dominate and rack up good scores. So there are a chunk of guys that I don't like. But I think a guy like Reddick, who starts 18th, is going to be really low owned. Should be under 15%. I could even see him under 10%, depending on how the field plays it. And if he sneaks into the top 5, that could be a really good score, and could be a sneaky play. And then I do like the entire group there of Suarez, Jones, and Briscoe. Are really good plays. They don't start in the 30s, so they're not going to garner the attention that Gregson and LaJoy do. But those 3 all have good upsides, relatively fine floors. And I do think they're the type of plays that can, you look up at the end of the race and they're 8th and you're like, oh crap, that was the play I needed to be optimal. So I really like those guys. They'll be obviously at a lower ownership number to the guy starting in the 30s, which is, where you're getting that leverage. And if memory serves, and I don't know if this will change, but at Daytona, all the Stewart-Haas cars qualified in the same range, and they were like 12% owned. No one played Josh Berry. No one played Briscoe. No one played these guys at Daytona. And it was very, very confusing to me. I was like, yeah, I get them being like 20%, but we're talking like 12% here on these cars. And that was very surprising. So I'm curious to see how they do after a decent start to the year for Stewart-Haas, if those drivers get a little bit more love.
I think you're going to see the same, man. I think you're going to see the same. I don't think anybody's going to play him. It's so easy to jam in 6 of those 8 chalk guys you mentioned. Everybody's going to do it. It's so easy to do. Like, you're going to get guys like Barry, guys like Briscoe, guys like Suarez, maybe Jones. Jones is probably still going to creep up to 20%, I'd say, because, he's starting a little further back. But, yeah, you're going to get those guys at under 20%, I feel like, and that's just going to be Give me that. I want to lean into those plays and let everybody else play the 30% Denny Hamlin chalk. Like,
Yeah. The only reason I projected those guys in the mid-20s, and Sora has barely cracked 20, but is because of Cindric, Dillon, McDowell, Gillen, Priest. Like, those guys feel like such bad plays that they're going to get like no ownership. So I feel like there's going to be a little bit more, but you're right. I mean, there's a very good chance that the large majority of those guys we just talked about aren't over 20%. And I could be wrong again, and we could be looking at Chase Briscoe at like 13% for no reason other than people play it that way. So very intrigued by that group, and they obviously have the place differential potential, which is good, and they'll carry a little ownership leverage, which is beneficial as well.
Any Michael McDowell love on the ball? No. I will tell you, like, I like plus 2,200 for him though from the poll. Like, that's a good number, I feel like. I mean, you get the pole sitter at that number.
I would like for him to win. I think he can run up front most of the day. It's just from a DFS perspective. Maybe on something like FanDuel or something. I don't know. And we need to talk FanDuel just a little bit at some point. I had someone bring that up. One of our premium members asked for more FanDuel. So we'll talk about that in a second. But, I would love to see him win. I think obviously his car is going to be fast. But, unless he leads 100 laps and finishes at the very front, it doesn't matter. You have a chunk of guys with like 70-point upsides that can all supersede anything he does unless he leads 100 laps. So, I mean, he has to have the perfect race. It's not super likely. He's not the guy to lead 100 laps. So, for me, that's a no-go. I wouldn't really play anyone starting on the pole unless it's Austin Hill against weak competition like we saw today.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I will just throw this out. Like, I mean, you do have some Fords starting up there. He's got his teammate behind him. Like, can they train up for the first while, right? But yeah, you still need a lot to happen. I like him much more as like a outright to win. I think you get more value out of that than in DFS. There are a few guys like that on the slate today, like Todd Gilliland starting third. Like, I think that's a fun one to throw a bet on.
My dream is that we get a winner like that. My dream
Austin
is
Dillon.
Austin Dillon would be great. Like
he's starting fifth, right? He's got speed, so I mean, we've seen him do it before. Like he's 4,000 plus 4,000. Like, I think that's a good one to throw.
Yeah, my dream is that we get a random winner. Like, I think that'd be fun. It'd be entertaining. Honestly, the start to the year has been all JGR and HMS, and that's kind of made me crave a new, fresh kind of random winner. I think we're due for someone like that. So hopefully one of those guys can pull through, but I'm not touching them for DFS purposes.
All right, so let's go. This is my kind of like favorite range where I feel like we can always find lower on plays in the like sub 6K range in super speedways because it seems like you've always got salary left over, right? Everybody's got salary to spend, so people aren't playing multiple guys in this below 6K range, so it typically leaves us with some pretty low on plays here. So who do you like in that low 6K range where we can probably find some leverage?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely an obvious play in Carson Hocevar, and then Zane Smith sits really good. But I think my favorite play is, and I don't even know if he's going to be that surprising, is Justin Haley. Justin Haley's really good at super speedway racing. He's a guy that has top 10 potential regardless of the situation. And I think he's a guy that could get teamed up. He seems to be working well with the RFK guys. I can see him getting paired up with Keselowski and Buescher at points and just kind of riding in the front with them. And his speed overall is pretty good on this style track. So I think, if we get a higher carnage race and he avoids it, that's really good potential. I think on speed alone, we can see him challenge for a top 10. Not a guarantee he'll get there. But I think it's a good solid play. And I trust his ability in general over a lot of drivers on super speedway. So I think it's a good play. And then the guys that we should talk about at some length is BJ McLeod and Cody Ware. We know, or I've been saying that it's a lower carnage track recently, but that doesn't mean that it can't be a huge crash fest either, right? Doesn't mean we can't get 20 DNFs. And these guys start dead last besides Kyle Larson. And they will ride around. They are not going to be in that pack. Well, Cody Ware, maybe. I don't know. He's a loose cannon. But BJ McLeod's not messing around with that pack. He's not tearing his shit up. He's looking for a bunch of wrecks and they get 20th. And in that instance, I'm kind of guaranteed of a floor of like probably 15, 20 points. But the more crashes we have, it's just every driver's +2, +2, +2, +2. You get a huge 10-car wreck. All of a sudden, the dude's running 19th and scoring 43 points. So I don't mind them as plays. I do like them as a safety net. My concern is you need a huge DNF count to get them into the top 10 or top 15. Whereas Daytona, we get that. Here, I'm not sure we can. I'm not sure we're going to see like 20 cars crash out. I think it's more like, okay, 10 guys crash out, 12 guys crash out. So maybe their upside's more around 20th instead of 12th. But they do factor in, and you never know. Like, dude, they wad them up coming to the checker flag, and BJ McLeod puts right by them and passes 15 cars on the last lap. You just never know. And so I don't mind mixing them in. I don't mind mixing them in for their floor. If 8 guys crash out and they all start 18th and 20th or whatever, they're going to score negative points or 5 points or whatever, and BJ McLeod's going to outscore him by 20 plus. So he can factor into your lineups in a positive way, and you can play him with the mindset that, hey, I just need this lineup to cash, which he can help you do. But then if it gets super crazy, the upside's, that he's a slate winner.
Yeah, one of the things that I do, and I'm curious if you do, when you're constructing lineups and you're building your lineups, do you like build like, okay, this lineup I'm building for if there's a big ass wreck, right?
Yeah.
And like that would be a lineup, right? That I would throw BJ McLeod and I'd throw Ware in, but then I would also in that lineup probably be really fading a lot of the chalk because I'm thinking there's gonna be just something fucking massive happening, right? And it's gonna wipe out maybe a chunk of that chalk. So if I just avoid that, check out, if I can avoid 3 chalk guys that get taken out in that wreck, and then I got the 2 shit markers from the back who are 5% owned that scores 50, then like my day is spectacular regardless who makes it through, right? Just need those
exactly. Yeah, definitely. I'm a big game theory build for scenarios person. It definitely works a lot better in F1 because everything's a lot more straightforward there, where it's like if X happens, then B, or whatever. Whereas in NASCAR, it's like this happened and holy shit, all that happened as a result. Like NASCAR can be a little too chaotic for that sometimes. But yes, definitely, it's like if this big carnage race happens, then not only do I think BJ McLeod and Cody Ware have a lot more upside, but I also think there's a much more likelihood of these chalk plays crashing out. And if I can get off and back to the winning lineup today, getting off Anderson in that build helped, right? He was 40% owned or whatever. Get off Jeffrey Earnhardt at 37% owned helps in that lineup. So when you have those chalk guys and they're a part of the carnage or they don't deliver, that's when it starts to work out, and you have to play those scenarios as well. So yes, definitely like building for that craziness and then factoring in like, hey, those guys that are starting 30th, they're going to be in the blender, they're going to be in the bee's nest, and they can, end up with an issue as a result. And it's a lot more likely that way. So absolutely.
Yeah. And one other thing that I like to do in that same regard, like when I'm building for the chaos, like I'll like to build like to put 2 guys in my lineup who like my or 2 to 3, right, of guys that I think are going to be riding at the front, like in front of the chaos, and then 3 guys at the back who are going to be behind it all. Like I'm trying to plan that out theory in my head, and like the wreck's going to happen in the middle, and then my guys will join each other as the top 6 for the takedown. So you talked about game theory. So along those lines, stacking up and trying to think about how it's going to happen. So do you do team stacks, manufacturer stacks? Is that something you lean into as well on these tracks? I know some guys do.
To an extent, it's situational. I definitely like Keselowski and Buescher. I like that type of pairing together. Like I look at certain teams, I'm like, yeah, Blaney and Logano can get up there and work together. Yeah, like there's situations like that. But I'm not like sitting there thinking I can't play William Byron without playing Chase Elliott, or I can't play like. I don't go into that. I will look for scenarios where kind of into the game theory things like if Buescher and Keselowski can get up to the front and dominate together, I think they both have the potential to score really well, and thus I want them both in my lineup for this build, right? I'm envisioning the scenario where they finish first and second, which we saw at Daytona last year. I'm trying to envision those scenarios that way, more so than I'm like, I'm putting all the JGR guys together because they're going to finish 1, 2, 3, 4. Because that's not super likely. That's not logical. So it's more about like, how do I see this playing out where a couple of guys work together, pair together, what have you. And the most obvious ones are the Penske and RFK guys because they've done it most successfully, of anybody. Right. Denny Hamlin's been incredibly successful, but Bell, Truex, and Gibbs haven't been. So it just depends on the driver and the team and the situation for that. But yeah, definitely. Like if I can get a good stack of Fords together that I know will work well together, I'll definitely do that.
Yeah, because like along those lines, right, of the forwards, right? You mentioned Keselowski and Buescher, and if you're building your lineup thinking those guys are going to be paired together at the end and at the front, right? For that to happen, especially if like you're also saying this is going to be a low carder, so we're going to see long green flag runs, which means green flag pit stops at the end in that last stage. So if Keselowski and Buescher are there, then that means the Fords probably had a really good stop on that last one. So are they're going to probably go. I mean, you can build that they're going to bring those guys like the Barry, right, with them. That guy like maybe Briscoe, right? That would be a good time to pair those low owned guys from the back, those Fords with them, because you can see the scenario of all those guys rolling together, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Love that because that's a great mindset because they are, if we get those long green flag, and that's honestly what's been kind of screwing these races up are the long green flag runs. We get these green flag stops where the field gets split up, right? And then whichever manufacturer has executed the best is getting out front, and that sets these guys up, at least puts them in a better position to score well. So yeah, I do like that.
So those low carnage builds that I'm doing, like I really love stacking manufacturers. Like I really think that's a good way to go because I think if you got a long green flag around, like you said, you're gonna have a single file train and you're gonna see a good chunk of manufacturers likely being successful. So don't know who it's gonna be. It's typically Fords, but all right, let's wrap this bitch up, shall we? Give me your core four more. Who are your core four drivers to build around today? I held up three like an idiot.
Core. Sorry. Core four, I think it's going to be, for me, it's going to be Hamlin, Blaney, Larson, and let's go LaJoy because I think he's a little bit less crazy than like Stenhouse.
You don't want to core up Stenhouse, do you?
No. And I am leaning into the Hamlin and Blaney concept that they've been really successful here. And then kind of run through like Blaney's last 9 races. First, 25th in an accident, 9th, 15th, 11th, 2nd, 1st. So he's finished first or second 5 of the last 9 races. He has a 9th, 11th, and the 15th, which aren't horrible results. So he's delivering at a really high rate. I don't feel like at Daytona where it's like, holy crap, he can get tied up in a wreck. It feels less likely to happen here. And then even Hamlin in his last 9 races has only one finish worse than 18th and has finished top 5 in 6 of those 9 races. Or excuse me, 5 of those 9 races and 7th in another one. So I feel pretty comfortable in those guys that at a pretty high clip, 66 to 70% of the time, they're going to get the results they deserve. And so I'm not too afraid of them. I don't necessarily need the 30s guys that you're going to smash in as your core. I think I want those guys as my core plays, Blaney and Hamlin for 4 tournaments.
Hamlin only has one finish better than 14th on super speedways since the start of 2023.
Yeah, it was 3rd here last October.
4th, right?
Nope, 3rd.
3rd? No, 3rd. But still, I mean, that's
the thing.
Like if you got this guy like that's going to be 30% owned, and we're looking at his back markers where he's paid off 1 out of the last 8, like that's telling you it's a fade on Hamlin.
I don't care about
that. Fade Hamlin.
I'm playing Talladega. I'm not playing Daytona, so I'm gonna feel okay with it. And quite frankly, he's due for a good one. Law of averages suggest that he's due for a good finish.
I just dirty Denny's. His luck needs to run out soon. All right, poor 4. Give him to me. Who we fading? Don't give me the top 10. Top 10 can be one guy. Top 10 can be one guy.
I can only pick one guy from the top 10?
No, you can just say top 10 as one guy.
Oh, I was just going to give a poor 10 and give the whole top 10. Yeah. I would probably say let's go Austin Dillon and Martin Truex. I'm going to give those 2 specifically. Because I don't want to be too high on them. John Hunter Nemechek starting 20th. A little risky because he could magically finish top 5, but that'd be a fluke, right? And then my favorite fade on pretty much any given week, Harrison Burton. I just don't trust that dude at all. If anyone touches his rear bumper, it's like he's going to crash because he has no car control. So let's just assume he's going to crash again by himself or with the slightest bump and move on from him. And then 4 more. This is really I'm just going to give out that entire group we talked about being in the late 20s. Jones, Briscoe, Suarez, and Barry. Like, I think that group, we can see 1 or 2 of them on the winning lineup, and they can see half the ownership of the guys like Larson and Chastain and all that group. So I really like that group from a tournament standpoint. I think if you're trying to be a little bit different, you don't have to go crazy by playing someone starting 13th. You can play a good place over guy starting deep in the field still, but also get half the ownership of the chalk guys on the slate.
All right. Well, thanks for breaking that all down for us, Larkin. I think you set us up on a path to success for today's Talladega race, or tomorrow, whenever you guys are watching this. Will probably be rain. Maybe it'll be Monday morning and you're watching this. Who knows, right?
I saw that the rain should be gone by 1 o'clock and it might get in. So that would be fantastic. The latest update's a good one.
Yes, that's good. That's good. That's good. All right, give us a winner.
Oh God. Bubba Wallace.
Bubba Wallace. I like it. I like that pick.
I picked in my rankings, I actually picked Keselowski to win the race. I do that almost every super speedway race, if I'm being honest. He's a 6-time winner here, but for the show, for excitement purposes, for having fun with it, Bubba Wallace for the win.
Give me a long shot.
Bubba Wallace doesn't count.
No, he's not long shot.
Long shot. Let's go Carson Hocevar. Just because he's the guy that will not lift. You know, if it comes down to it, he's at the front. He is not lifting. He's driving through you. So let's go with him.
All right. I like it. Thank you all for watching. Thanks for listening. Lark, you guys, I will have the wheel of winners out in the morning at some point. So check my Twitter if you guys feel like, you know what, screw everything Larkin just said. I just want to test my luck with fate. You can go in there, spin a wheel. It'll pick your drivers for you. Probably just as good as chances trying to guess the optimal, right? So Larkin, tell everybody where they can find your stuff at. Give a pitch.
Yep. So dailyfanracing.com. Hopefully you know by now. I really should have the banner up. It's on Jason's hat, but that is the website I run. So hopefully, if you're not a subscriber, you'll sign up with us. Got F1 here at about 3 a.m. if you're interested in playing that.
F1's already hard enough to stay awake for it, and they freaking got to watch it.
I don't think I'm doing this one. I don't think I could do this one, but definitely check that out. Jump in the Discord and chat with us and whatnot. I appreciate you guys checking out the show. Make sure you subscribe. We're almost at 500, which is really cool. So once we get to 500, I can start paying Jason like 50 cents a show, which is awesome. So get us there. If you haven't already subscribed, please do. And thanks for checking things out, and we'll catch you next time.
See you guys.
See you. Bye.